Okay, I think we're all set to go. Welcome everybody, and happy Living Wage Week, and bon appetit as well. So I know many of you, and I think many of you know me. I'm Greg deGroot-Maggetti. I serve as the Walking with People in Poverty Program Coordinator at MCC Ontario, and also the chair of the Ontario Living Wage Network. I'm happy to be here today with Anne Coleman, who's the manager of the Ontario Living Wage Network and sometimes works out of the office here at 50 Kent. So we're here to tell you a little bit about the growing living wage movement in Ontario. Now, usually at these lunches, you know, the speakers get up and talk, and you can just easily sit back and listen. I was thinking of doing something not nice and doing like a word association thing. When you hear the words living wage, what's the first thing that springs to mind?
Great.
What's the second thing that springs to mind? Anyhow. Good pay. Yeah. Dignity. Yeah. Equity. Good pay, dignity, equity. Yeah, these are all things that are part of what living wage is about. So what Anne and I would like to do is we'll tell you a little bit about this, what the living wage is about, the purpose of it, and the movement, and how the movement is growing, and basically what it's all about. And then hopefully we'll have time for questions. But why don't we just jump right in? This, by the way, is a picture of staff of the KW Multicultural Center, which became a living wage employer about 4 or 5 years ago. And that was them getting their living wage certificates. And that's me on the side there, handing out. I wasn't working for the Multicultural Center. I was handing them their certificate. So let's start with what is a living wage. Well, it's a living wage is the hourly wage that a worker needs to earn to cover their basic expenses and participate in community. And sometimes we'll go out into the community, like at the Multicultural Festival in Victoria Park, and ask people to finish the sentence. A living wage means dignity, the ability to support my family. So that's what one person wrote for what living wage means to them. So what's the problem? So why even think about living wage and engage in it? Part of it is reflecting the fact that there are a lot of people that are working that are not earning enough to get by. So in the 2017 provincial government study on labor standards found that 1 in 3 vulnerable workers in Ontario were in precarious jobs. So by vulnerable workers, they mean people who maybe are newcomers or visible minorities, women, people with disabilities, are in precarious jobs, including jobs that pay very low pay. And another study had found that in Waterloo Region, now this is going back a few years, but there were 27,000 workers in Waterloo Region who were working poor. So working, but not earning enough to get above the poverty line, not earning a living wage. For many years, MCC Ontario, in our poverty work, would do advocacy to government to, what kind of policies can help reduce poverty, things like raising the child benefit and social assistance rates. And we'd often hear from people, and often some certain politicians, that would say, well, the best poverty reduction strategy is a job. But we just looked at those statistics and realized that not all jobs actually pay enough for people to be able to get above the poverty line. So minimum wage is just not enough. At $14 an hour, if you're working full-time, full year in Ontario, there's no community where that would get you above the poverty line. So work should be a route out of poverty, and that's why we got involved in, by we meaning Mennonite Central Committee Ontario, a number of years ago with several organizations in Waterloo Region, including Kindred Credit Union, the Social Planning Councils, the United Ways, House of Friendship, to launch Living Wage Waterloo Region. And really we launched it as a practical tool for employers who wanted to be a part of reducing poverty, so that they could know that they're paying their staff enough to make ends meet and have a little extra. And actually, when we started signing on employers as living wage employers, some of them talked about how they were paying above the minimum wage. At the time, the minimum wage was $11 an hour, and paying their staff, the starting salary at $13 an hour, and then realizing when they went, to visit at one of their staff members' house, realizing that they were not paying enough money. So when the living wage came along, this one employer in particular, they bumped the staff pay up within 3 days to get it up to the living wage rate. So that's why we talk about it as a practical tool for employers who want to know that they're paying their staff enough to make ends meet and participate in the community. So let me hand it over to Anne, and she'll talk a little bit about the calculation and about how employers go about becoming certified as living wage employers.
Thanks, Greg. So when we calculate the living wage, we have a reference family of 4 with 2 working adults, 2 children, and we take into account all of the expenses that they might incur over the year. We look at the necessary things as well as some additional participation pieces, and I'll get to that in a moment. But then we take a look at what government transfers or credits are available and take into account the taxes, run it through a wonderful, lovely, complicated calculator, and it will give us an end result of a living wage rate for our community. So we're really pleased. Yesterday we announced the updated living wage rate in Waterloo Region is $16.35. So this is a little bit higher than it was last year. We were at $16.15, but there's been some changes, some increases in the cost of living in our community and in some of our different basket areas. So these are the different areas that we take into consideration when we're doing our research and bringing together data for our living wage calculation. So we look at things like childcare, housing, transportation, food, clothing, all of those necessary things. And this infographic will give you an idea of what those annual costs are for a reference family. We also have our other expenses category, and that includes the participation piece, so recreation activities for children. This is where you would have something like a modest camping vacation, the ability to take your family out for dinner and a movie once a month. So it's all of those different participation pieces, and that's within the other expenses category. So the living wage rate is different depending on the community. It's very specific. We're looking at actual rental costs in our community, the cost of transportation specific to Waterloo Region. Just to give you an idea, living wage rates range across the province, and I can't remember the lowest one, but I think it's somewhere in the low $16 range. To up to $22.08 in Toronto. So there's a pretty wide spread, and it's very specific to the different communities. So we have an employer certification program, and this is really one of the ways that we address the concerns of working poor in our community. So what we've asked employers is for them to make a commitment to pay all of their staff at least the living wage. And so that's their direct staff, anyone they directly pay, have on payroll, but also indirect staff. So if they hire out a cleaning company, this is a frequent example, we want to make sure that those cleaners, when they're working in that business, are earning a living wage as well. And this is the way we make differences in the community. So the living wage program is voluntary, and it's something for employers who are able to go above and beyond for their employees and want to ensure that their employees really are earning a living wage. So these are photos from a number of different employers in Waterloo Region. Once they're fully certified, we have an employer directory on the Ontario Living Wage website. So all new employers are added there, and then they receive a certificate. We like to share that through social media. So you might ask, why would an employer want to or feel it's important to pay a living wage? Well, one of the things that I hear over and over again from employers is that when they have gone from, made a change, gone from paying employees a low wage, perhaps minimum wage or a little bit higher, to paying a living wage, they see a real difference with their employees in terms of loyalty, productivity. In one of our employers, Helmi Ansari, he is the owner of Grosh, which is a company in Cambridge. They have a retail store in Guelph, and they sell coffee and tea glassware. He is very passionate about the living wage, and he's told us that when he hires a new employee, it takes about a year for them to really fully understand the job and be working up to par. So if you have a high turnover rate, that's really impacting your business. So by paying living wage, it increases retention rates, and employers are spending less on hiring staff and training staff. We have a great example. Damon Starr is a business owner in Niagara region. He talks, again, very passionately about the living wage. And he said that once he changed his business model and began to pay a living wage to all of his staff, some of the bigger mistakes that were being made in his business were greatly reduced. His staff are much better trained, they're sticking around for a long time, and they really care about the business and about what they're doing. So he was a manufacturing company, big $1,000 mistakes, and that's been greatly reduced. He's bringing in more income for his business, for his family. So, you know, our employers really do speak highly to, and do a much better job than I do, about the benefits of a living wage for their business. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of, I guess, some statistics, I'll throw it at you here. As of yesterday, we announced updated living wage rates right across the province, and as well had 5 new communities that had done living wage calculations. So we now have 27 communities right across the province that are participating in our employer program. We have over 250 certified living wage employers in Ontario. This number is a little bit hard for us to calculate. When employers complete our enrollment form, we ask them how many employee wages they raise so that they can join the program. We also have an opportunity for employers to phase in the living wage program, and so we can see how many wages they raise specifically as they move through our levels of recognition to paying everyone a living wage. So we know we've raised over 1,000 wages in Ontario. But it's a bit misleading because we don't have a great method of recording how many new jobs are coming in to, or new positions are being created within these certified employers. So it's at least 1,000, but we know that that number is actually a lot higher. 550 of those increased wages have happened right here in Waterloo Region. We have 64 certified employers within Waterloo Region, and I'm really proud to say that currently, although certainly other communities are gaining on us, we have the most certified employers within our community currently in the province. So this is Helmi Ansari, and I apologize, it's probably quite difficult to read this quote, and I'm going to have to squint here and try and see if I can share it with you.
It's on the banner.
It's on the banner? Okay, so Helmi says an engaged staff is their competitive advantage, and it sets them apart in a very crowded industry. So just to sort of end off the presentation, one of the things that we like to, or the perspectives we like to look at this from, is that the living wage is good for people, it's good for business, and it's good for community. So the living wage is good for people. We know when people begin to earn a living wage that they're no longer living in poverty. They have an overall better wellness, they're healthier, they have less stress. We know that it's good for business. I talked about higher retention, staff retention, less money spent on training and hiring staff. But the living wage is also good for community. When people begin to earn higher wages, they're more able to participate in community. They're more apt to be civic-minded. That additional income that they have is something that is going right back into our communities and being spent at local businesses. So that is everything for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I don't know if we have time for questions or comments or anything like that. I'd be happy to answer.
So there's a real quick overview. What questions do you have? You say your question, keep it simple, and I'll repeat it.
So I noticed in the calculation, it has an amount that's set aside for non-OHIP related
Medical expenses.
Medical expenses. If somebody's working for an employer, where those expenses would normally be covered through the employer's benefit program, do they recalculate the living wage?
So Dan's question, just for those who might be listening in, is we have a category in the calculation for non-OHIP medical expenses. And if an employer is paying, provides those benefits, do we take that into account for the living wage calculation? So I'll hand this over to Anne because that's a great question and she's got a great answer.
All right. Under pressure. So we do, when we're doing a calculation, we assume that the employer is not providing health benefits. So we include the cost of health insurance. When an employer does provide health benefits, we can run that through our calculator and kind of figure out a benefit offset, which essentially lowers the living wage rate for employees that are receiving that benefit. We can only look at health benefits because that health insurance is included. And if the health benefits cover 80% of generally everything, then I would run the offset of 80% of the cost, less 80% of the cost of the health insurance. We include other things like critical illness insurance, life insurance. Those are 2 taxable benefits, so we don't do any offsets for them. The living wage calculation actually does not include any savings for things like children's education, debt repayment, and retirement. So oftentimes employers will provide contributions for RRSPs, but we're not able to take that into account because it's not part of the calculation.
So you mentioned that this calculation is for 2 adults, 2 children. And I'm interested if you can comment on single parent families. I know this is a tool and not a perfect calculation, but
Sure. So the question was that we have a very specific reference family with 2 working adults and 2 children. But what does that look like with other family types? There's so many different family types out there. It's certainly not going to be a one-size-fits-all. And acknowledging that the living wage is a tool, so it's not going to be perfect. What we've done in the past is we've run tests and looked at what the cost would be for a single adult and a single parent with 1 child. The costs in the past have been, the end resulting living wage rate has actually been fairly similar, so it hasn't been a huge diversion, but it's something that we constantly need to keep our eye on because as things evolve, as new policies come into effect, Canada Child Benefit's a good example. We want to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind and that our living wage rate isn't too low. So it's something that we're keeping a close eye on, and as we continue on each year, we'll reassess that and make sure that we do have the best family type or the best situation. Good question. Great.
I first just want to congratulate you on how transparent you guys are with the process, and that makes, I think, a lot of employers just easier to sign on, and it makes it easier to understand as well. So the question I was going to ask is, where are you seeing the biggest shifts in those increases in the living wage? Where are we seeing in those different amounts? Where are we seeing those go up the most?
Sure, specifically in Waterloo region?
If you want to give that example.
Sure. So yeah, the question was asking about where we see the biggest changes in basket items or in the costs for our family within our different basket items. And so I can speak both to Ontario in general, but also to Waterloo Region. So I did mention with Waterloo Region that we had a bit of a bigger increase than we've had in the past this year. And to be honest, most of it, surprising to me, most of it actually was due to an increase in the cost of clothing and footwear and food within our region. Food was the big one. So we know that the cost of rent is a concern in Ontario and is rising right across our province. And usually, typically, that is the reason for big increases or jumps in the living wage rate. That's the case in Toronto, Halton, Kingston. There's certainly a lot of examples of that right across the province. That's just, and that's not to say that that's not happening in Waterloo Region, but with the data that we use from CMHC, Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, what we've been given was not a significant increase this year, but that's not to say it hasn't been other years and won't be in the future.
I thought where you were going with that question, Greg, so I'm going to answer a question that I would hope somebody might have asked, but was where are we seeing growth in the number of living wage employers? So, if you visit livingwage.ca, the website, you can actually sign up for a monthly newsletter. We send out a monthly newsletter with news about what's going on. A couple months ago, we had a nice, interesting graphic of the different industry makeup of living wage employers. And the living wage employer program is open to employers of all sorts. For-profit businesses, not-for-profit organizations like MCC Ontario, which is a certified living wage employer. Public sector employers, we have some municipalities who have signed on and are implementing living wage with all their workers. So it's kind of interesting to see there's actually a very, very diverse range of employers. And what's been really nice to see lately as well, and even in Waterloo Region, we have two cleaning companies, two cleaning services. Three now, and it says, who are certified living wage employers. So they've shifted around, or some of them started out their business with a commitment to making sure that they were paying their staff well, knowing that that's an industry where wages are often pretty low. We have several bakers around the province who, similar thing, the owners worked for many years in the baking industry and knew how poor wages were, so then they started a business, they committed to pay a living wage. So it's exciting to see that diverse range of employers. The other thing that's really exciting that we're beginning to see more of right now, in the early days of the program, a lot of the employers that signed on were already paying all of their staff above the living wage rate. But what's beginning to happen is we're getting more and more employers, as Anne was referring to, we asked, have you raised the pay of any staff to come on? And just this morning I saw an enrollment form come in from one community where a new calculation had been done, and I forget the number of staff, about 15 or so, and they indicated that they raised the pay of all 15 of their staff to become living wage certified. So as the word gets out, we have, and really somebody the other day was asking me, well, how do you get these new employers signed on? Really, it's word of mouth. It's a peer-to-peer thing. Somebody who runs one business talks to their cleaner, or somebody else they know who's in business, maybe not in the same field, and talks about the benefits of the living wage program. And so now we're at the stage where we're really, I think, beginning to see newer employers coming on, actually implementing changes and lifting the pay of workers, which really is what the program is meant for. And just another little plug. Oh, so sorry.
No, I just had a question for employers who maybe they don't have any even entry-level positions that are below or at the living wage. Is there a nuance to the program to help educate, bring those employers on, even though they may be above the living wage, but have a greater understanding and acknowledgement of the community?
Yeah, so the question is for employers who are already paying all of their staff, at least or probably well above the living wage, is there something slightly different for them or a nuance to the program focused on education? So within our program, I mean, we'll certify, certainly if an employer applies and they're already paying all their staff well above, and we have a number of employers that is for sure the case, they can become certified. And one of the pieces of our program, we have 3 levels of recognition. Our champion level is our highest level of recognition, and a part of that is a willingness to talk about the living wage, to be actually championing the living wage within the community. So that is a piece of it, and a very important piece of it for our program, because that's why we are spreading through word of mouth, and that's why we're gaining new employers. And having that support in the community is something that's really great, because it adds to our employer numbers and helps to other employers to say, hey, this is something I want to join, or perhaps public sector employers saying, hey, there is real commitment around this and support around this movement within our community. So it is really important for them to get involved as well. Absolutely.
So I guess we just have time for finishing words. So just a couple things to finish off, and Anne and I can stick around if you have any other questions and would like to chat. 2 things. One, look for the Ontario Living Wage Network logo, or I got the little pin, but if you walk into the offices of MCC here at 50 Kent, you'll see them on the door. Living wage employers, we invite them, encourage them to display that logo. So if you see that someplace and you want to support that business or that organization, please do look for those logos and support them. Happy to say too, we also have large-sized logos that some of the employers asked, could we get decals to go on our vehicles? So in a very short period of time, when you see MCC thrift trucks driving around the province picking up materials and dropping them off and donations, you're going to be able to see the living wage decal on the truck. And if you happen to be from an organization that is not yet a certified living wage employer, visit livingwage.ca, and it'll direct you to contacting Anne, who will walk you through the process, and we're happy to answer questions and help you figure out how to become a certified living wage employer. So I want to say thank you very much for coming out today for the lunch and for the great questions and your interest. And yeah, if you have any more questions, those of you here in the room, feel free to come and chat with us. Thank you.